Shalom, everybody. Back here with the Baal Sulam's Matan Torah, with commentary by Rabbi Avraham Mordechai Gottlieb. This is section 12, the bottom of page 83, and Giving, as translated by Arya Siegel. Let's start off. The Mitzvot were given only in order to gradually purify people from a nature of receiving to a nature of giving, and therefore love and compassion. How amazing would it be to start off one's education in Judaism by saying just this, that the goal is to love and to give and to unify humanity. Would have been more attractive to me, at least. In my upbringing, I was not such a fan of the idea of Judaism, but I digress. The Baal Sulam begins. And these are the words of our sages from Midrash Rabbah in Bereshis chapter 44, or Genesis. In their question, quote, "What difference does it make to the Holy One if one slaughters from the throat or one slaughters from the back of the neck? After all, the mitzvot were given only in order to purify people. This purification constitutes the refinement of the muddied body, which is the ultimate aim that results from the fulfillment of all the Torah and mitzvot." Quote, "A person is born a wild young donkey," from Eov, or Job 11:12. "For from the moment that a person emerges and is born from the bosom of creation, the newborn is in a state of utmost contamination and degradation." As we've learned in a prior class, donkey, chamor, spelled the same way and has the same root as chomer, clay or raw material, being that our raw material is just that. The raw material of our being is that of a donkey, or is that of the will to receive from oneself alone. And we're here to refine that. We're born with that initial nature, and we're attempting to rise and work towards the second nature, the altruistic nature, the human and godly nature, as we are made in the image of the Creator. This state is defined by the exceedingly great degree of self-love that is imprinted in us. For all our movements are compelled to pivot around this self-regard without the slightest spark of altruism. In this way, we are as distant as can be from the root, completely at the opposite extreme. The root is entirely giving without even the slightest spark of receiving, whereas the newborn, that is the created being, is entirely in a state of receiving for itself without any spark of giving at all. Therefore, its position is discerned to be the bottom point of lowliness and contamination to be found in our human realm. Strong language, but the bitter truth. Let's read that inside again, and then read along with the Rebbe Shlita's commentary. The Baal Sulam says, "And these are the words of our sages, as quoted from Midrash Rabbah in Bereshis chapter 44. In their question, quote, 'What difference does it make to the Holy One if one slaughters from the throat, from the back of the neck?' The Rebbe Shlita says on this, 'Our sages wondered why we are required to observe all the details of the mitzvot, and they took as an example the requirement regarding slaughter of animals for food. What's the difference to God whether we slaughter from the throat or from the back of the neck? The sages could just as well have asked regarding any mitzvah. For example, why have an etrog, or citron, on the festival of Sukkot instead of waving an avocado? I like avocados. Essentially, their question is whether the form of observance is an end in itself, or just the means to affect us in some way. If the form is an end in itself, then it's irrelevant as to why the mitzvah has a particular form. However, if the idea is that the mitzvot should have some effect, then it makes sense to ask whether there should be any difference if we should do them differently. And the answer of the sages is that the mitzvot are a means and not an end. And really, it is insignificant to God whether slaughter is from the throat or from the nape. But the mitzvot are indeed intended to purify us. That is, to cleanse us from the contamination of self-love. And the form that God set for the mitzvot is the best means for purifying people. The form in itself is insignificant, but all its importance derives from its effect on purifying us. However, we do not have the freedom to determine for ourselves what should be the form of the mitzvot. For the one from whom emanated the creation determined how best to refine the creation, how the mitzvot can light up our souls and can free us from the nature of self-love. This is a big contrast to any form of Judaism that's not considered Torah Judaism or Orthodox Judaism, so to speak, because all other branches are in relation to the exacting system to refine oneself and achieve the goal of their purpose in life and their personal correction. We are to be exacting as best as we can, slowly but surely, in all of our journeys, to take on and perform the Torah and the mitzvot, both in intention and in action. Where other branches make claim and do what's comfortable and try to, unfortunately, reform in a way that fits in with their will to receive for themselves alone. We should ask ourselves how we fit into Judaism, not how Judaism fits into us. The Rabbi Shita continues, the deeper truth is that each form of the mitzvot is precisely determined by its spiritual roots in higher worlds. And it is not at all incidental or insignificant. The whole system of the worlds is arranged for this purpose, that each of us can perfect our souls and become a chariot for the revelation of God. They are not imaginings, but spirituality, ways of being that have no time or place or form. They are a wondrous variety of spiritual levels whose central theme is the revelation of God in differing hues, measures, and aspects. The central point of the Kabbalah is the connection between the spiritual worlds and daily life. I think it's important to note that the spiritual worlds are not places. No one's flying to Mars or Jupiter and the like. Spiritual worlds are states of consciousness, these levels of receiving to receive, giving to receive, giving to give, and receiving to give. Therefore, all the worlds, all the different delineations of consciousness, even angels, as we describe them in the wisdom, are all aspects of you and I. They're aspects of our consciousness. Everything is within us. Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya, it's not somewhere we're going to, rather it's a state of being we reveal within. Hence, connecting these spiritual worlds in daily life, in reality is saying, unveiling these higher states of being, these more divine qualities within us into our daily life, revealing the love and the giving and the compassion within, and serving from that place, even to the most minute details. The Bishita continues, when we begin spiritual work, we need help from heaven And this help comes by fulfillment of the mitzvot. As we begin to understand the spiritual roots of the mitzvot, we can draw down the light of God's revelation that will assist us in achieving the desired effect of the mitzvot, the purification of the soul. Understandably, as time has progressed, there's also been shifts in certain laws. For example, the fact that technology has come into our world, into our lives, that the great rabbis who decide on Jewish law, the poskim, have made decisions as to where certain things fall and how to consider technology and the like in the system of Torah and mitzvot and its laws. But to the point of what the Rebbe Shita is saying here, that everything has a spiritual root. Everything, without exception. Everything you see in this world, let alone every action and every detail of the Torah, mitzvot, and halacha, has a root above. So to say, I'd like to do this and not that. It's one thing to say, I will eventually take such and such on because I'm growing. That's perfectly healthy and perfectly fine. And hopefully everyone has a true rabbi to connect to. True rabbi, as we've spoken about, is someone who's giving and refined and has no desire to receive for themselves, and is at least aiming for the truth if they haven't yet achieved the truth of correcting their own soul. If we're looking for spiritual guidance, we need a spiritual master, not a master on law or a master on the Talmud. If you have a question on Talmud, ask the Talmud master. If you have a question on Jewish law, ask the expert. If you have a question on your inner work and how to refine yourself according to your path, find the spiritual master. Find the tzaddik, the righteous person, and connect to them as best as you can. It's incumbent on us. Just as the Jewish people had Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron Cohen, and all the leaders, the chieftains of the tribes, it branched down, but there was leaders. There was who to defer to. It's very, very important also to practice giving, to practice nullifying the self, mivateling, as we say in Hebrew. We want to do X, Y, and Z, but to seek the guidance of someone who's, relatively speaking, more in line with the characteristic of the Creator and is closer in the dveikus with the Creator, we want to ask such a person. I think a beautiful example, a mashal, of the value of the minute details in Judaism and why it is important to take note and to keep them. Relationship connotes responsibility. The New Age movement, I myself having been a part of it before coming back to my roots and taking on a Torah lifestyle, sometimes would pray to the universe as opposed to whatever notion I had of the Creator. We believe that reality is not something separate from the Creator. Creator is reality. There's nothing but divine reality at all times. There's just many coverings that we hopefully will slowly but surely unveil to see and feel the godly reality. And if not, to see and feel, in the meantime, to believe wholeheartedly that that's the case. Point being is that it's an interesting insight I had recently. To pray to the universe is no responsibility. Relationships connote responsibility. And to have a relationship and say, this is my God. We are His people. We are soldiers. We have a service. We have a job. We have work to do. That's a big load. It's the biggest burden we could ask for. It's a lifetime of work. And that could be bitter. As opposed to the universe. The universe doesn't ask anything of me. What I put in is what I get. Everything's just flowing and it's all good. And there's truth to that. It says that Hashem leads us where we want to go. If you want to do X, Y, and Z, He'll help us out. He'll bring us there. But why it says here that we need help from heaven in our spiritual work. If we want dveikus, if we want refinement, if we want to do the work, He'll bring us there. We will get siyata d'shmaya, heavenly help. But the example is, A couple is on a 20-year anniversary dinner. Husband brings his wife to the same restaurant they went to on their first date. The napkins are the same design, same cup, the same bottle of wine from the same year even. They order the same food, they somehow get the same chef, so on and so forth. And the wife appreciates so much these minute details that he remembered and took care to happen, took care to make it part of the experience. So too in our experience as we do Torah and Mitzvot and uphold it, how much more so do these minor details of the halacha would bring joy to the Creator. We say we want to come to a state of loving the Creator. We want to come to a state of altruism. It would only make sense that we would take care to keep the minute details, just like in this anniversary date, in order to give nachat ruach, to give a spirit of pleasantness above, and therefore causing waves in the upper worlds, being the internal system that integrates all of humanity, which connects us all together, slowly but surely, until we're literally one again, because we're all just fragments of one soul. To continue in the Baal Sulam. After all, the mitzvot were given only in order to purify people. This purification constitutes the refinement of the muddied body, which is the ultimate aim that results from the fulfillment of all the Torah and mitzvot. The Rebbe Shlita says, the muddied body does not refer to the physical body, but to the bodily portion of a person's soul, which is the desire to receive pleasure and joy. Refining the physical body or training the stomach is certainly not the issue here, but rather changing the person for whom the physical body is just an external wrapping. For example, learning to live with minimal food may just increase one's ego. Baal Sulam insisted that the only measure of spiritual development is whether you seek to receive for yourself or you want to give to others. I've heard the Rebbe Shita say that something as spiritual and as grand as the mitzvah of tefillin. We think tefillin is a mitzvah. It's a spiritual act. Period. And eating, for example, though it can be spiritual, if I say a blessing on it before and afterwards, it can be spiritual, but generally speaking, maybe more raw, maybe more coarse, maybe more material. The novelty here is that it all depends on intention, meaning I can put on tefillin and it could be a completely material action. It can be completely physical and self-serving and be quite the opposite from spiritual. In contrast, I could do a very physical action and it could be spiritual, like eating food, making a blessing, being thankful to the Creator for providing such sustenance, such ability to consume and to enjoy. Which is also powerful in the sense that there's a lot of practices out there, let alone asceticism and Eastern practices, that surely are focused on the body and self-improvement and self-love, and as one of the highest forms of the will to receive in spirituality, as opposed to cultivating the will to give. But even in Judaism and times of the past, and some still practice today, things like, fasting out of their own desire. They'll take on random fasts and things of this nature. But the point is here is that it just increases your ego, or it can, generally speaking. And if it does, then it's not worth it. Simply put. Tov. One moment, I'm just going to close the window here. Baruch Hashem that there's kids who still play outside, play with balls and sticks and run around, in contrast to my life as a secular person in America. I myself being trapped in the web of video games and the internet, to appreciate like the religious community whose children are so natural in their enjoyment. They can really like get by a whole day of playing with a stick and a ball. In contrast to 2 or 3-year-olds that have tablets as babysitters. There's spiritual roots to everything. So to imagine and contemplate the depth of this type of education versus that, neither being perfect, but it's a bitter contrast. The Baal Sulam continues, quote, "A person is born a wild young donkey," from Eov 11:12, or Job. "For from the moment that a person emerges and is born from the bosom of creation, a newborn, the newborn is in a state of utmost contamination and degradation. This state is defined by the exceedingly great degree of self-love that is imprinted in us, for all our movements are compelled to pivot around this self-regard without the slightest spark of altruism. In this way, we are distant as can be from the root, completely at the opposite extreme. The root is entirely giving without even the slightest spark of receiving, whereas the newborn, that is the created being, us, is entirely in a state of receiving for itself without any spark of giving at all. Therefore, its position is discerned to be at the bottom point of lowliness and contamination to be found in our human realm." You can say, but Adam Yitzchak, I give, I enjoy to give. Amazing, thank God. But those who have passed the threshold and come into the state of giving to give, it's hard to come by. It takes a lot of work. And it's possible for all of us. That's why we're here. But generally speaking, most of us are under that threshold and are either in receiving to receive or giving to receive. It can be a lot of pleasure to give, but the root of the desire is still receiving. As we learned recently, in fact, all of our desires are coming from the desire to receive. That is our raw material. At some point, we do gain a second nature, and we can rise above that initial nature. But the Rebbe Shita says, on this point of our position and having to discern it as the lowliest and most contaminated found in the human realm, the Rebbe Shita says, each of us needs to get to the realization that the words written here apply to him or her, that his or her condition is at the lowliest point of contamination in all of human existence. Until we get to feel that this is so, we cannot develop and advance from the level of an animal to the level of a person. It's like a person who's invited to take a trip and imagines climbing mountains and crossing rivers. But only when he or she actually tries to do those things does it become apparent how unprepared he or she is. Similarly, until we attempt to take the path of selfless giving, we don't realize how completely lowly and contaminated we are. For only then do we see that every move we make, without exception, revolves around the pivotal point of our desire to receive without even a tiny spark of a true desire to give. This is a most bitter point, and it's the most bittersweet point. It's specifically from contemplating the fact and reality of these words, as the Rebbe Shita says, that we build the vessel, we feel are lacking, we understand and contemplate how far we actually are from our root. This lack is a vessel that will be filled with the light of the Creator. This lack is specifically the place that we can raise true prayer. If everything's great and there's no lack in life, the words that you speak to the Creator are not necessarily prayer, generally not. They might be praise, they might be thanks, surely. But prayer is something to fulfill a lack. So instead of saying, good luck, what we really need, as I heard from my teacher, Rav Nachum Levi, we need a good lack. So we should wish each other a good lack. We should actually pray, as the Rebbe Shlita says. We should pray for the correct lack. We should pray for the correct desire to feel the lack, and therefore pray for the desire to give. Because it's only from that place of lack can we do the work. Even as I say this, my insides are like battling this. It's such a difficult point to contemplate. But I can only stress it so much. One should meditate and contemplate it themselves and realize that there's really no other way. Other than suffering. There's two basic paths, as we've spoken about in the past. There's the path of suffering and the path of light, or the path of Torah and Mitzvot, in other words. This includes the path of Torah and Mitzvot. It's very much in line with Torah and Mitzvot to reflect on oneself, to make a cheshbon nefesh, an accounting of the soul, to ask oneself, where am I holding? Where are my intentions? When I did this or that today, was I giving? Was I loving? Did I have emunah? Did I have faith? Did I believe that everything was for the best? Where am I? What do I desire? These cultivate true lacks, good lacks, which, by definition, equate to great fulfillment. So much so that at some point we refine ourselves to be happy with the lack. Every lack that the Creator reveals within our consciousness as we look for it. Just like we look for the chametz, we look for the bread before Passover. We're looking in the nooks and crannies for our ego. We're looking for these wills to receive within ourselves in order to rid ourselves of our ego. To rid ourselves of the swollenness, the leaven, the bread. We want to be thin and humble like matzah. Tov, B'srat Hashem, with Hashem's help, slowly but surely, as we continue this learning and connect to these tools, and hopefully connect to a true rabbi, we'll have the means to reach our intended purpose, and hopefully help others as well along the way. The essay after Matan Torah, which is what we're currently in, is called Arvut. Maybe we'll continue and learn there after we're done with this one. Arvut is mutual guarantee. In short, we're all in the same boat because we're all one soul. All the best. Till next time.